Alright guys, Murphs here, and today I kind of want to go over the anatomy of the modern rifle scope and discuss some of the things that I evaluate whenever I'm looking at modern variable power optics, as well as things that I grade high for specific uses. I mean, that's one of the big things about it. Whenever it is that you're looking to get into a scope and rifle combination, what it is that you need to be evaluating for purpose. Because at the end of the day, everything should be driven by purpose instead of just like throwing things together and going, now let's figure out what the purpose is. So for this, I've got a really cheap 2-7 optic that a friend of mine just gave to me from AIM Sports to kind of help guide me along the path of what it is that we're talking about whenever it comes to scope attributes. All right, starting off with our objective. So you will find that scopes have a designation that runs in a series of numbers. So like this is a 2-7 by 42. So the 2 indicates the low end of power, which is 2 times magnification. The 7 is the high end of the power, which is 7 times magnification. And the by 42 is the diameter of the objective lens. Now, you'll find a wide variety of objective lens diameters out there. 24, 32, 42, 50, 56, all those types of things. Why would you pursue one objective diameter over another? A lot of the information out there discusses the amount of light that the objective lens allows in. Now, obviously with more light, you're more able to see clearly whatever it is that you're trying to view through the reticle. You're going to be able to better pick out fine details and all that kind of stuff instead of something just being kind of a hazy outline of whatever it is that your target is. More light gathering capability that you have, the more possibility to be able to make those things out. Now, the objective lens is not the only portion of light gathering that we need to discuss whenever it comes to a clear reticle, but it does play a part. Now, also the coatings on your lenses and all that kind of stuff are going to play a part as well. And that's kind of a big minutia discussion that we're not necessarily going to get into in this particular video. All right, coming back to our main tube. Our main tube comes in a couple different diameters, 1 inch, 30 millimeters, stuff like that. Now, this is going to impact a couple of things here. This is where a lot of your internal focal lenses are and all that kind of stuff. And you also have your erector housing in here. One of the big things about your main tube is going to be adjustments. As you dial your clicks and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to make your engagements, a 1 inch tube is going to run out of adjustments faster than a 30 millimeter tube is going to. In addition to that, the wider the tube, the better the light transmission from your objective lens to your eye is going to be. You're going to be able to get more light through faster. That's a big deal. So this is kind of a two-part portion whenever it comes to a clear optics picture and all that type of thing, in addition to the adjustments. Now, there are other things that you can do to impact your adjustment capability, and that is also have a 20 MOA riser for your rifle. Now, this is really going to come into play if you're trying to push something out to long distance. And it can help you work around a 1 inch tube, but a lot of that's going to depend on cartridge and rifle combination and all that type of stuff. That's kind of its own minutia discussion for another time. All right, now first focal plane versus second focal plane is all about where the reticle image is in relation to the erector housing. If the scope image is in front of the erector housing, then it is a first focal plane scope. And if it's behind the erector housing, then it is a second focal plane scope. And there's a lot of discussion that's had over first versus second focal plane. And a lot of times you'll hear people say that the first focal plane is the better focal plane. However, that lacks a ton of context. So what is the difference between these two focal planes and why does it matter? When you have a first focal plane objective or a first focal plane reticle, the hash marks and all that kind of stuff, the spaces in between, everything about your reticle has true values all throughout your magnification options. So if you have a whole bunch of, if you have an MRAD or a mil dot scope or whatever, all of your corrections that are on there, all the stuff that you could use to make corrections are accurate no matter what magnification you are on. That is not the case on a second focal plane reticle, in which your reticle does not change size, which that is what happens with the first focal plane. It'll change size in order to correlate with your magnification. So if you zoom way out, then the reticle is going to be quite small. Whereas if you zoom way in, then you're really focusing in on the reticle at that point. It'll be quite large. A second focal plane is going to be the same size all throughout your magnification range. However, it'll only be accurate at the highest magnification, or whatever magnification that the manufacturer indicates it's going to be accurate at. So with that being the case, if you're trying to make corrections off of a shot on any of the lower magnifications, you're going to have to do additional math. Now, is that a big deal? No, not at all, actually. You just have to be aware that that is a thing that you have to do, and it is going to take more time, depending on how fast it is that you are with math. In my opinion, why one matters over the other entirely comes down to use. And that is a contextual type thing. If you're talking about making precision shots at long distance to where you're going to be doing a lot of dialing so that you can center hold on your target and then make adjustments from there, then yes, a first focal plane optic is better for you. And that's primarily because you're going to be spending a lot more time at the higher magnifications and be able to easily read your reticle to begin with. However, if you try to put that into a combat type application, say you're running and gunning something fairly close, even in a DMR type role, if you have to zoom out and try to utilize that reticle for that type of purpose, it can be done, but it is not my favorite. It becomes very busy at that point. It's too much data. And it's almost too small to read, so you're just kind of moving around this mass of small script around trying to engage targets rapidly. Not like having just a simple like 2 MOA red dot or something along those lines. It's very different from that. Whereas with second focal plane, with it being the same size, you have the same amount of clutter no matter what. So if you have a illuminated reticle or something along those lines, it's going to be very easy to focus in on what it is that you need to do and make those rapid engagements, especially since in that case, in the tactical type sense, it's less likely that you're going to be dialing to your target. That's more of a, in my mind, I think of that as more of like a sniper type setup. All right, I'm trying to engage this single target out at this distance. I know the distance, I know my dope from my projectile, and I've read the wind, and now I'm going to make these corrections, and I'm going to take my shot, and then if I miss for whatever reason, I now hopefully can see it on my reticle to be able to make those adjustments on my scope, on my rings, or on my turrets, in order to be able to make my next shot impact. In tactical type shooting, you don't have that kind of time. And there's a high probability that you don't have that kind of time. I'm not saying that you won't have that kind of time. There could be situations where that occurs, but for the most part, you're not going to have that kind of time. You're just running off of whatever data is available. So now you're moving and kind of Kentucky windaging it. All right, I fired this round, it impacted over here on this line, so now I'm going to put that line center of my target and send the next shot in order to be able to pick up data. And this type of shooting is going to work just fine for aggressive combat style shooting from 5 yards out to 300, 400, 500, however far it is that you have to engage. Now a DMR type role might blend between the two. They might have to do some rapid target engagement type stuff. They might have to do some dial your turret type thing and make these super precision shots. They kind of muddy the waters between which one they would be most advantaged by. Be it second focal plane or first focal plane, I don't think on a DMR setup there's a wrong answer. But I do think that the best answer for precision type rifles are first focal plane scopes, and that the best answer for combat, close range type shooting reticles are second focal plane. That is my own personal preference. That is how I evaluate that. Now with that, let's go ahead and talk about etched and illuminated reticles. Now one thing that I found about illuminated reticles on variable power optics is that they are not that powerful and that they can be easily washed out by the sun. And that makes sense because you got a lot going on in that scope to begin with. And as you add in features like first focal plane or the thicker main tubes or larger objectives and illuminated reticles and all that kind of stuff, the scope's getting heavy and it's getting expensive. So I don't necessarily think that illuminated reticles are a necessity as much as they are very nice. Etched reticles, on the other hand, are most definitely a necessity. Now, for the most part, when it comes to a lot of your variable power optics, you're going to have etched reticles. That's more of a discussion in prism type optics. But in general, make sure that you're not running some type of scope that is only visible whenever it is illuminated, because that's not a good combo right there. All right, so we talked about the main tube and a lot of the internal type aspects of the reticle and all that kind of stuff. Why don't we go ahead and talk about our turrets. Now this is of course a hunting style scope. So it has these caps that go over top of your turrets, and then you can adjust the turrets and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to make your, zero the rifle and all those types of things. These are not meant to be dialed on the fly, though they can be. If you're looking to do some type of precision type shooting, be it really even tactical type shooting, if you have a scope that you're either doing tactical or precision type shooting with, I recommend that you have locking turrets so that you don't accidentally bump your zero. Now, if you're talking about a hunting rifle, I'm less worried about that. These capped type turrets are perfectly fine. I would never recommend unlocked turrets. So in this case, a capped turret is a locked turret. Something that you have to physically, a lock that you have to physically disable in order to be able to make adjustments is something that is a necessity on tactical style optics, in my opinion. You have to have them. Purely so you don't lose zero, because it's going to be, any number of things could happen. You had it bouncing around in the truck, it brushed up against your kit or your body or something along those lines, that turret moved, and now your zero's off and you are having difficulty engaging. Now, in addition to that, on precision type rifles, I think a zero stop is incredibly important so that you can make your adjustments, all that kind of stuff, in order to have your center hold type engagement, and then be able to dial back to zero without having to remember what your adjustments were. That's kind of like a safeguard right there. If you happen to remember your adjustments, fantastic. But if you didn't, no big deal. You'll be able to adjust accordingly and get back to what it is that you need to do. All right, now, with Illumination, of course, you would also have an Illumination wheel. This is an illuminated reticle. I don't think, yeah. Ooh, no, there's a battery in there. Huh, who knew? It's quite bright, actually. You'll have some sort of, which will also have your battery installation right here. Now, in some higher power scopes, you will also have parallax adjustment. You can have parallax adjustment in two ways. You can have parallax adjustment as a knob mounted on the side, or you can have parallax adjustment, which is a ring that goes around the objective. Now, something to keep in mind whenever you're looking through multiple focal planes is that you are going to have to take parallax into account. And parallax is largely based on distance. When you're shooting at sub 200 yards, parallax is something you're going to have to dial in. A lot of that comes down to the positioning of your eye behind the scope, and then adjusting parallax in order to make sure that everything's clear and that you are able to properly observe the target without actually being at some type of angle or something along those lines and missing shots because you're not accounting for that properly. And at distance, being off just a little bit will have a compounding effect when it comes to accuracy and target engagement. So parallax, very important. Now, also with some precision setups, especially in match type sense, you'll see levels being attached to the scopes. That is important because it comes to the same overall idea. If being slightly off center of my reticle is going to change or impact my engagement out at distance, then the rifle being canted one way or the other is going to do the exact same type of thing. And you see that if you're doing any type of dynamic shooting off of barriers to any amount of distance. You do kind of have to, you wind up having to hold on shoulders more so than you do center whenever it comes to that type of engagement. If that's not something that you're planning on doing from the beginning, it could really mess up your shooting. All right, your magnification wheel is located just forward of the bell, and this allows you to be able to change magnification. You can get rapid throw levers for this type of stuff if you have like a 1:6 or a 1:8, something along those lines, and you're wanting to very quickly dial or change the dial between your magnifications and all that kind of stuff. Now, of course, you're going to find a wide variety of magnifications out there from, 1 to 4, 1 to 6, 1 to 8, 1 to 10, 2 to 7, 3 to 9, 4 to 16, 5 to 25, all those types of things. You're going to find all kinds of stuff, and all of it comes down to your application. If you're talking about a more being able to dial between close range and long range type application, then a 1 to 10 or anything in between are going to be fantastic options for you. If you're talking about more of a DMR type use, then a lot of it's going to be what type of distance are you living at. If you're living at 300, then maybe you can get away with like a 1 to 6 or a 1 to 10, something along those lines, 2 to 7, like I have set up on my Mark 12 Mod Murph, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description if you're interested in a DMR type setup that I put together. Now, if you're talking about living at more like the 600 or something along those lines, then perhaps a 3 to 9 or a 4 to 12 is going to be more advantageous to you as a DMR type capacity. If you're talking about shooting out to 1,000, then the 5 to 25s or something along those lines are going to be more advantageous for being able to change up your dials to be able to still observe target and impacts and make adjustments and all that kind of stuff. Having enough zoom in order to be able to get out there to be able to read the target as well, and a lot of your windage indicators and all those types of things. All right. So that's the magnification bit. Let's go ahead and talk about reticles real quick. Now, there's a wide variety of reticles out there that you can utilize in your scope. You have the simple, crosshairs, and then you have reticles that have tons of, hash marks and circles and fiduciaries in there in order to be able to estimate range and all this kind of stuff. There's a ton of options out there. That's not really what matters in this particular case. What I think is most important is that you pick something that matches your application. If you're talking about a hunting type scope where you're only shooting 250 yards and based off your cartridge and your zero, you know that if you hold center on the kind of boiler room of a deer, you're going to hit, somewhere in that boiler room out to that distance. You don't really need a complicated reticle. A duplex reticle or something along those lines is going to serve your purposes just fine. You don't have to spend more money on a more complicated reticle. Whereas if you're doing a lot of like rapid target engagement and all that kind of stuff, but not necessarily long range precision shooting, a BDC type reticle might be something that's really advantageous to you at that point. Now go into the purpose of long range precision shooting, sniper or sniper type competitions and all that kind of stuff. You might want like a Christmas tree reticle with tons of data and adjustments and all that kind of stuff so that you can rapidly get back on target and make the hits that you need to hit. It's all about application. I'm not going to tell you that one thing is better than the other, as much as to say that you have to be very, very specific with yourself about as to how much data you need. Because too much data can become confusing to the eye in different circumstances. If you're talking about doing something super rapid and you just need to find center, you don't want a bunch of other information in there clouding up the issue. In my own opinion, I like simple. I'm a big fan of simple. I can do a lot with simple. All right, eye relief. Eye relief is how far your eye has to be from the scope in order to be able to properly view the reticle. And this means no shadow involved at all. So this is a long eye relief optic. As we can see, I've got like 8 inches of eye relief off of this. This is meant to be something in a scout type setup. So I hold it out this far. I have nothing dark in the reticle. I am able to view it. This is about the closest that I can get. So about 6 to 8 inches of standoff. Some optics out there have like 2.5 inches of standoff. It's just something that you have to take into account. Now, a lot of this stuff is going to play into eye box. Now, eye box is how much wiggle room you have to be able to move around the reticle or to be able to move around your eyepiece without introducing that shadow. On lower powers, you're going to have more eye box. So on like 1 power, you're going to have a ton of eye box. But as you move up to 4 power, you're going to have way less eye box than you would have. And then when you get into the maximum magnification of a scope, you're going to have even less eye box. Now, a lot of that comes down to if you're doing some type of tactical type shooting around barriers and all that kind of stuff, where you're not necessarily going to be able to get the perfect cheat to stock weld and all that type of thing, and it could really mess with your shooting. Knowing what your eye box limitations are going to be a major portion of that. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you have a better understanding of what it is that you might need to be looking for whenever it is that you are selecting your scope and reticle options out there on the market. There's a ton of options and there's a ton of good ones. And of course, there are plenty of other videos on YouTube that cover more in depth the pros and cons of different setups and different specific manufacturers of scopes. So go ahead and check those out and kind of use this as a guide to be able to decide what it is that you do and don't want in a scope to be able to match your purpose and your build, your project, if you will. All right, so if you guys found this interesting, you're still with me here, and you want more interaction with this content, you guys should totally check out the Murph's Law Facebook page, which I have the link in the description. If you want some behind the scenes footage, some access to be able to ask me questions directly and all that kind of stuff, that's the place you want to be. So with that, that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.